Yep.
So we are looking at posture today. We're going to dive into the overhead squat. So I'm going to move through the overhead squat totally today. Like I'm going to move through that assessment today. And then we'll talk about some variations of that. We'll talk about the less test, which is actually something that you probably haven't seen yet, but is in your sports performance book, which you guys are going to be picking up soon. Because that is this mod. So you're actually getting it, instead of getting packets, like we've been doing packets, we have like our 4 program design classes, 3 of them are packet based, but our 4th one is actually like a NASM physical book. And if you are wondering why some of them are packet and why some of them are physical book, they would all be physical book if the physical books existed. There is only a book for corrective, sports, and the regular NASM. So it's not like we're being lazy giving out the package.
Now, yeah, I have a question actually in regards to that. So obviously we're here in school with you, but what about the people who sign up online and do the NASM program online? Would the material be just online for them and in the book, or how would that?
Yeah, they have like, if I'm not mistaken, I'm to be honest, I'm not sure.
Oh, okay.
You know, it's not something I've ever actually seen, because that stuff is pretty disconnected from us. Like, you know, like we don't work, like I work with NASM and like communicate with them here and there, but for the most part, like they don't like I don't have that much, you know, I only rub elbows with them. I don't have that much interaction.
Got it. Okay.
So seeing their other materials, like I couldn't even tell you, like, you know, there are other certifications. If it's not in like our Sochi materials, like if they didn't send us this stuff, I don't know what it's like, you know?
Okay.
So that online stuff, I know that like years ago, and this is, you know, so long ago, but like when I first got certified, I had access to some of the online stuff. And like, it was like videos and a podcast. That's what I had. But this is so many years ago that like, I'm sure it's nothing like that. There's a whole, like 2 editions of the textbook ago, you know?
Oh, okay.
Oh, and I had access to an online exercise library. That was another thing that I had access to. I could click, you could go online and click like chest, stabilize it, and then it would show you a list. But other than that, like that's all I had back in the day. I'm sure it's better than that now. I'm sure that like it involves, you know, probably like online videos, and then there's probably like, you know, if you think of like any online course that you see, there's probably like some type of interactive quiz at the end of every chapter that they ask you. But the difference between like what they teach and what we teach is like, we do have classes that are not just NASM classes. Like, so for instance, like starting at the end of this course, right, where we're going into the sales performance class, the sales professional development class. So that having a professional development class isn't a requirement of NASM. It's a requirement of the state in order to be a vocational school, right? Vocational means to work-based.
Right.
So, you know, part of like our service is to help you guys get like jobs. Like we're not allowed to guarantee that we can get you a job, but we're supposed to like help with it. So, you know, we help people build resumes, and then those resumes get sent out. We used to do that at the end of the program. Like it used to be like, you know, you would kind of wrap up your program, and then you would basically the career services people would kind of build a resume with you, and then you would get sent out. But then as Sochi got larger, like, you know, we've only got the 1 person in career services, that resume building would get delayed, and then the job application process would still get delayed. So what we did is, you know, we have to have a professional development class anyways. We modified that class to make sure that you guys walk out of here with a resume, with a cover letter, and everything like pre-made. That way, when you get to career services, like Miriam can just be like, great, you're all set. Boom, out on an interview.
Nice,
you know?
nice. That's good. I like that, because then you really like dedicate a whole class to that.
Yeah.
It really informs you on how to go about it, because I mean, I think most of us here, I've trained, you know, people through some of the knowledge I learned from other trainers and things like that, but never really applied to work at a facility as a professional trainer.
Yeah. So, you know, luckily you have a professional development job. So that class, right? That's a class that we're required to have as a vocational school. It wasn't necessarily something NASM required. However, they're luckily, and this is just stroke of luck.
Mm-hmm.
There is actually a NASM professional development chapter. It's very small. It's very, very small. But like they actually do have like a quick bit of information onto like what information is relevant on a trainer's resume, you know, and little bits like that. So we took some of their materials and used that to supplement like our requirements. So we took the information on that, but then we also know that some people want to be like their own business owner. So we're going to talk briefly about that, like what it's like, how you need to market your services. So, you know, NASM's going to ask you, like, it's 100 questions. About 10% of, I think actually 8% of them, if I'm not mistaken, are going to be the professional development and like trainer requirements, like legal stuff chapter. So like, you know, that's going to be about like the 4 P's of marketing, which we'll teach you briefly. And that really comes down to owning your own business. They won't actually ask you like what information is relevant on a resume, even though that is important, but it's not on your test. But they will, what is really important is like, hey, what do you need to maintain every 2 years before you can apply your continuing education credits? Like, oh, I have to have my CPR current, you know? How many CEUs do you need to earn? You need to earn 2.0 every 2 years, you know? So it's like, they need you to know that information. So we got that all kind of thrown into one class. And then, so that's an example of something that's like unique to Sochi, our sales class, right? Our professional development class. But then like our anatomy and physiology class, right? Is actually not taught out of a NASM textbook. That's taught out of that Memler's textbook. Because it gives you a stronger foundation for that stuff. So some of our materials are different than what you would find on that online course, and some of it's actually probably pretty similar.
You know, but I think it's great. I mean, I actually am very happy with this course. You're a great teacher, and also a lot of other schools don't really offer this. I mean, this is very, you know, detailed. Other courses are very speedy.
Yeah, see, that's the big difference is like in kinesiology, right? Like normally you would read chapter 5 and then you'd maybe watch an online video and that would be the end of your kinesiology lesson. We go through it a little bit differently, you know? So that little bit of difference, I think, is what makes all the change in the world. It's funny, you'll get students and like, we'll have students who are, hold on. They have tried to take their test in the past. And then they come through and they're like, I just couldn't absorb it the way, you know, I bought this package online. I just wasn't able to absorb it. So, you know, like hopefully like what we give people fills in like those gaps. And a lot of times like what they're missing is the really intense practical stuff, you know, not so much the science stuff. It's actually, you know, usually the learning like how to break the OPT model in. A lot of people tend to get that really blurred together, which works, by the way. Like you can totally blend levels and phases together. Like that's actually okay. But you know, you don't want to learn it that way. If you learn it that way, it's not clear. And then you're screwed when they ask you a question because you're like, which is the best exercise for a client, for a beginning client here? And you're like, well, both those are really good. And it's like, yeah, but they said beginning, so phase 1, you know, like, And you're right, they are both good. But according to NASM, like, you got to build that, you know, in order to be integrated and systematic, you need to start from the bottom.
Makes sense.
Whoops. That's all of your emails. I keep it copied so I can send it to you every day. Great. Let's take a look at, so this is going to be PFT 101.
Let's do it.
Essentials and fitness assessments. This is going to be day 8. How did I do this yesterday? PowerPoint, 5 slides. What is it? We're starting from 44 down to 59. A lot less than yesterday.
Yeah, I did notice that. I was watching the video last night. And I was like, whoa.
Yeah, I didn't see the timestamp. I didn't pay attention to this timestamp yesterday, but I think it was a pretty long one.
Was
It's mostly just like whenever we review something and I have to put it in your notes, I'm like, I gotta have it in one note, like chunk.
yeah.
Okay. So we are talking about posture today. So primarily, if you take a look at your day by day, right, we are getting into the posture stuff today. That's going to be your overhead, your single leg squat. And then you're going to see, like, we'll talk a little bit more about posture stuff, you know, moving forward here, like the less test and things like that. Actually, the less test should be up here. What the? Boop. Well, your day by day might have a typo on it. But we're going to look at some of those posture assessments today. And then as we move through the rest of this course, right, you'll notice that it might have moved on to, like, you know, talking about a day of 1 rep max testing, which will actually be a pretty quick talk. Like, we'll wrap that up pretty fast. But we don't, well, in order to make sure that, like, today we don't spend like 10 hours on just talking about like the overhead squat, because there's so many different postural distortions that exist in our overhead squat. In order to make sure that we're not talking about like every one of those just all in one day, we're going to talk about the assessment in general today, and then we will tackle a postural distortion or two each day over the rest of the course. So we'll talk about like feet turning out and knees caving in, which will look pretty similar to, you know, pronation distortion syndrome, because obviously that's like a symptom of that, you know. So that's kind of where we're headed today and for the rest of the class here, because we got a few more days left. So posture and movement, obviously all movements require like a good base for you to be able to commit and create that movement from. That is what we call our posture, right? It's your foundation for how you are resting and how you are able to create movement from that foundation. So if we define it, I think we've already got this in our notes actually, but we're going to put it up here. Posture is going to be defined as the alignment and function of all components of the human movement system at any given time, right? It's the resting length that your muscles are sitting at, right? Proper posture allows for proper function, or proper neuromuscular function, and optimal movement, right? You're gonna move better when your posture is at a good resting position. One of my favorite ways to do this, actually, to highlight this, if you just try like rounding your shoulders right now and then raising your arms up overhead, it's impossible. You literally are going to hit hard tissue onto hard tissue. And that's because, like, if you look at your glenohumeral joint here, right? I need to see, like, this is a drawing, but that's actually very accurate. See this little hook right here? When you elevate your shoulder, what ends up happening is like the amount of space that there is between this disappears. And then as you try to raise your arm up overhead, this hook starts grinding on that bone right there. So
where does the clicking occur on there? When the elbow clicks, where does the clicking occur?
The elbow or shoulder?
Shoulder, I mean, shoulder, sorry.
So when you get the shoulder clicking, that's actually not hard tissue. What that actually is all these little tiny muscles inside the rotator cuff here are basically what's happening is they are grinding on something. Yeah. And the clicking that you're hearing or feeling is essentially like, imagine, I'm gonna make up like a fake hook here, right? Imagine there's like a lump like my knuckle here, right? Like see the bridge of my knuckle. And that muscle is supposed to like slide really smoothly over that. If that hump is pulled into like a more sharp angle, like because of poor alignment or poor posture, what's going to happen is it's going to hit that, and then it'll pull, and you'll keep pulling with your big strong muscles, which will cause this to suddenly go wham, and it'll slide really fast. That causes like fluid to move really rapidly, which makes, I actually just cracked my knuckles a minute ago, so I don't know if you can hear it, but makes that sound. That sound right there is fluid moving inside the joint. So the clicking that you hear is fluid moving around, but the clicking that you just kind of feel is also just that soft tissue. We call that shoulder impingement, actually. And basically it looks like this. It's often this muscle called your infraspinatus. That's one of the big ones. I'm sorry, not your infraspinatus. That's below. Supraspinatus, the one that's above.
Okay. Yeah.
So you can see it starts to like, there's just less space here, and so it starts to pinch. And see it starts rubbing on this little hook right here, rubbing on that little hook right there. So that's not hard tissue grinding, luckily, right? Like, if it was, you would be really damaged every single time it happens, That's why, like, it's a really good thing that cracking your knuckles is not actually the sound. Like, I get that it's like the sound that we think bones would make when they hit each other, like it sounds like that's got to be the sound of two bones colliding, but it's not. And it's a good thing that it's not, because like we would be, our body takes a very long time to repair bone tissue. Like if that was the case, we would be screwed. It's just like
forget about the gym.
Yeah, exactly, right? It's like I always tell people, like, what do you think the feeling, like when you stretch a muscle and you feel that like tight sensation, right? What do you think that sensation is? And people are like, it's your muscle fibers being pulled apart. And it's like, no, if it was your muscle fibers being pulled apart, you would be pulling your muscle. You would be cutting and damaging your muscle every single time, which you would be done for. That signal, that pain that you're feeling is actually your muscle spindles, and it's a mechanoreceptor. It's part of your nervous system that's just making pain because it doesn't want to move, It's the equivalent of a kid throwing a tantrum when the parent picks them up to leave Chuck E. Cheese's. I don't know if that accurately tracks, but but that's how I'm gonna.
It makes sense. It makes sense. Yeah.
All right, so yeah, that's a large part of posture, though. Like if you sit in like improper alignment, you are going to experience like those grinding sensations, I used to man, this is a weird thing about a weird thing from my past. I used to really like love the Lethal Weapon movies. This is so weird, right? Like what a specific group of movies to enjoy, but we had them on tape, and so like I thought they were really cool. And then the second one, Mel Gibson dislocates his shoulder to be able to get out of like a straitjacket. By the way, no, that does not work that way. But I remember like just being like, oh, that'd be so cool if you could dislocate your shoulder. And I remember just like goofing around my range of motion all the time. And I would get this like big grinding in my shoulder. And I'd be like, oh, it's going to happen. I'm almost there. When in fact, it was just shoulder impingement as a kid.
Well, I mean, if you think that's exaggerated, you ever seen the Blade movies?
Oh yeah.
I mean, man.
Yeah.
I mean,
I love those movies.
They're great.
I love the first two. The second one's rough a little, but like I love the first two. That third one, that was the start of action movie Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah, I don't dislike the guy, but it's just I don't know. I would rather have someone else in that film.
Fair enough. All right, so looking at proper posture, right? The big thing we need to remember about it is going to require proper length tension relationships, right? Posture requires proper length tension relationships, right? Which again is the resting length of a muscle and the amount of force that it can produce at that length. It needs to have that in order to effectively create movement, right? Basically what we're saying there is if you have altered length tension relationships, you're going to have altered neuromuscular efficiency, right? So if we remember that neuromuscular efficiency is that definition for recruiting the right muscle at the right time for the right amount of force in the right plane of motion, aka recruiting a muscle the way it's designed to be recruited. That's what we need in order to be able to move effectively. With improper posture, you're not going to have that. You're not going to be able to recruit the right muscle. You're going to recruit the wrong muscle, So like if I'm doing like a shoulder press, I should be able to push my arms up overhead, without sliding in any direction. But let's say I've got like a really tight lat muscle, right? Remember, my lat is in charge of adduction, and so it's going to resist abduction. So if it's really tight, right, what's going to end up happening as I go up overhead, that muscle doesn't want to stretch anymore. So what it might do instead is it might contract like this and give me this super intense, like low back arch, right? Because my lats also do a little bit of weak, like spinal flexion. So it'll stay in a shortened state. Now I'm putting too much pressure on my discs while I'm completely stretched out like this, right? And there's all this weight compressing my discs. I'm asking for, dysfunction, asking for a friggin' injury. So if that starts to feel uncomfortable, maybe instead I start moving like this. I start to actually arch back, and now I'm pushing 90 degrees up, right? But if you look at the angle, right? If I'm pushing up like this, and then I don't move my arm joint, right? I'm actually traveling forward with my arm. I'm not actually adducting. I'm doing a little bit of flexion instead.
Would that be the same position that you're in as doing a lat pull down or a pull up? Is that the same?
Yeah,
angle?
a lat pull down a little and a pull up are only ever so slightly different, just because you have to clear your chin. So as if you're doing like a dumbbell press, you don't have to worry about that. You could stay perfectly 90 degrees. But yeah, like one of the most common mistakes you'll see people do. Let me see if I can simulate this. I need a chair. One of the most common mistakes you'll see people make is like, you should do a lat pull down like this, right? It should be you pulling down. You're learning how to do shoulder adduction, but you'll see a lot of people lean back like this, and they'll do that, and that becomes more of a rowing motion. If you're doing that on purpose, if you're doing it on purpose and you're trying to like work on your rowing muscles, that's fine, but don't think that it's going to make you better at like a pull-up, which is fully like shoulder adduction, right? Those are two different things.
It's interesting because over in Valley Total Fitness back in Hollywood, when it was Valley, not LA, but there was a trainer there that would promote doing the lat pull down in that fashion. And he was against the other way. And then you're saying the other way. I mean, I've been doing it the way that you taught me to do, which I saw major improvement for that muscle. But this guy would promote it the other way, claiming it would give you better lats. But you're saying it doesn't, right?
No, see, here's the thing. Your lats, you got to look at what their actions are, right? Like they are in charge of a little bit of shoulder flexion, right? They're primarily in charge of adduction, right? So they're going to pull you this way, a little bit this way, and then they do that internal rotation, right? When you're doing, like, if you really want to target your lats, you want to primarily focus on adduction, not rowing, right? This is horizontal abduction. This is adduction, right? And this is extension. So the best ways to work your lats would be like the straight arm pull down like this, right? Shoulder adduction like a pull up, or a lat pull down if you're doing it properly. Now, I'm not saying, by the way, don't pull behind your head. That's a lot of people will do that as well. They'll try to stay super in alignment, so they'll do the behind the neck pull. Not a big fan of that. Number one, it causes forward head posture, so like something we're constantly trying to fight against in a world of cell phones. So like cell phones don't need help. So that's one reason. And then also, like, it's not as dangerous as like a behind the neck press. I want to get rid of them both. They're both bad. But if I had to like pick the greater of two evils, I would say pushing from behind your neck is even worse. Because what that does is that puts your bones in what's called a closed pack position. There's like no space between your bones. And so like you can really cause some serious muscular strain when you're trying to push behind your neck. So on a behind the neck pull down, it's not quite as dangerous because it's eccentric instead of concentric. But it's still like the same position. So it's like, avoid the freaking thing,
I never liked it.
Yeah, I mean, biggest reason I don't like. I mean, what's funny is like a lot of people will get away with it. You know, like people will do it. It's like you see people foam roll their low back all the time. They'll get on a foam roll and they're just gonna grind their spine. Nobody
Yeah.
ever gets hurt doing it. You know, but the risk is still there, and it's like,
Yeah.
and you're not getting any benefit beyond like normal. So it's like if you're not getting any benefit, but you're just creating risk, that's like, you know, putting money on a lotto ticket that you know you're not gonna win. You know,
Yeah.
like,
Pretty much.
like if you scanned it before and then you decide to scratch it off, why would you, you know, like,
Yep.
so just if there's more risk and no benefit, there's no reason to do it. So I'm not saying that it is, by the way, I'm not saying doing a lat pull down, I'm trying to like lean back here. I'm not saying doing a lat pull down like this is dangerous for you or anything like that. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
if you're, you know, that is a new exercise at this point. If you're going to do something like that, you might as well go get on the seated row machine and just pull like this.
Yeah, that makes more sense. I mean, you know, this guy taught me to do it that way. I was paying this guy, and you know, it caused me a lot of shoulder pain in my front delt, and I was doing that for years. And then I would see a chiropractor for my shoulder. It wasn't until I came to you here and you taught me how to do it right, the pain went away.
That's good. Yeah, that's what we want to hear. But yeah, again, it's not that you can't do it. I like I'll do different angles depending on how I'm moving. Like, you know,
Yeah.
like I'll do a lat pull down. Like if I'm gonna have somebody do that angle, I'll often have them grab the bar, and rather than like sit in the chair, I'll actually have them lunge back like this, and then just slightly lean forward if I want to continue with like that rowing motion. If I get their body all the way down, it goes back to being adduction. But if I like keep their body here and have them pull at this angle, it's not a bad way to get like your middle traps and rhomboids, but it's not helping with your pull up. You know, they're just different muscles. They're just different joint actions. Just like you know, some people do like you can do diamond push-ups and you can do normal push-ups and you can do like super wide grip push-ups. You know, you got to look at like what's happening, like what's your joint action on like a wide grip push-up. You know, it's moving like this. So a lot of people think that like because you're super wide out, you're getting more chest activation. But what you're actually doing is you're using more similarly to how you use like your deltoid muscles. So it's actually more of a shoulder exercise.
That makes sense. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. So people just got to pay attention to the angles.
Yep.
All right, so let's look at so without proper posture. Actually, this is one more little thing that goes on this line. So without proper alignment, we see a series of postural distortions known as predictable patterns of muscle imbalance. So this is what we're going to spend today looking at, right? Predictable patterns of muscle imbalance. So let's talk about really quickly before we get into it what a muscle imbalance is.
Yeah.
Right. A muscle imbalance is going to be alterations of the length of muscles surrounding a joint, right? So, you know, if you have like an overactive muscle, that is a muscle that is in a shortened or partially contracted state, right? It has literally become overactive. So we'll look at an example like, we'll look at the knees caving in, right? If a client exhibits knees caving in, the adductor muscles, which are responsible for hip adduction, are in a shortened state. So NASM will ask these questions a couple different ways. They like to kind of use different wording depending on how, I don't know, how they wrote the question. But we use the term, I use the term overactive a lot. Like that's the default term that I think it paints a better picture. So I've kind of gotten used to using that version. But they might also ask you, instead of saying like, which of the following muscles is likely to be overactive, they might say, which of the following muscles is shortened? Both of those are like interchangeable. They mean the same thing. They're like reactive versus plyometric. So when we describe something as being overactive, we are describing it as being in a shortened state. So if a client exhibits knees caving in, the adductor muscles, which are responsible for that adduction, are likely overactive. That's not the only muscles, right? Obviously, we know the internal rotators as well, but we're just giving one example here. If we're looking at underactive muscles, that's going to be a muscle that is in a lengthened or partially relaxed state, right? You basically have a muscle that's like real lazy and won't turn on. So again, if we go back to our example here, if a client exhibits knees caving in, the abductor muscles, right, your medial glute, oh, never mind, I don't need to write it that way. The medial glute, which is responsible for hip abduction, is in a lengthened state, right? It's basically in an underactive state. So when we're talking about muscle imbalances here, one of the key terms that we're going to use is we're going to call this altered reciprocal inhibition, right? Actually, hold on, I don't need to go there yet. So altered reciprocal inhibition. So this is one of those absolutely super duper key terms that you're probably going to see on your test. So altered reciprocal inhibition is where an overactive agonist decreases the neural drive of its functional antagonist, right? Again, this is an example of one of those things that you flip the other way. An overactive antagonist could decrease the neural drive of its functional agonist, whatever. Batman won't let the Joker do what it wants to do. The Joker won't let Batman do what it wants to do, right? Like, that's altered reciprocal inhibition. So you're seeing here, right? Take a look at this little picture here. You see an overactive muscle one way and an underactive muscle the other way. So this joint is sitting at an altered angle, right? This is somebody with forward head posture or rounded shoulders or knees caving in or arms falling forward, right? This is somebody who's sitting with like alterations in their posture. We'll use just a very simple example. Imagine this is your calf muscle and this is your shin muscle, right? So we got our gastrocnemius / soleus over here, and we've got our anterior tibialis over here. So because my gastrocnemius is always contracting just a little bit, I'm probably I'm used to being in this kind of slightly plantar flexed state, right? I basically want to be up on my toes as often as possible. And the muscle that is responsible for like pulling my toes back like this is underactive. This is primarily the one we're going to look at today, by the way. When we look at like feet turning out, that's pronation. That's a lot of like what causes pronation distortion syndrome. So you can see the alterations, right? This muscle will not let this muscle contract. And this muscle lets this muscle do way more work than it's supposed to. That's why it's altered reciprocal inhibition. Just as a quick refresher, I'm going to put it underneath here. Reciprocal inhibition, right? The normal reciprocal inhibition, which is a physiologic principle that is like how our brain controls our body, is going to be where when one muscle contracts, the antagonist relaxes. Okay, so like that is how your body's designed to work. If I tell my bicep to squeeze, my brain will simultaneously tell my tricep to relax without me having to really think about it, right? That's part of like an autonomic reaction. Your body is designed to be able to like let go in one direction while it's contracting in another. But if let's say you're playing football, right? and you get tackled really hard, or you get like it's just like a dead leg, right? Like somebody's knee runs into your quad and you're like, oh, you need a minute. You walk off the field, kind of rub that thing out. And then once you're feeling better, you're like, okay, great. And then you can go back and keep playing. That little bit of trauma caused the muscle to go, holy crap. And then it contracted, because contracted means protected, right? Like if it doesn't stretch out, if it doesn't get like pulled apart, it's less likely to ever tear, or at least that's what it sort of is programmed. That's sort of how it behaves. But obviously we know that pulling is likely to lead to tearing, actually. But like it stays in this kind of shortened, super tight position now. So, you get this really bad cramp and then eventually it goes away. You keep playing sports and, day's over. And then the next day you're like, oh man, that's still really bruised. And those fibers are just staying in that shortened state, and they just stay that way and they stay that way. Now maybe you've learned, like, that muscle has started adapting and it's actually repairing any damage that happened when it got hit with like some scar tissue, which is further going to decrease its ability to relax, right? Your body will always adapt along its lines of stress. So if we look at like scar tissue, what that is basically like, you can see here, it's this tissue that your body basically like puts along to heal up any damages, right? That's like what a normal scar is as well, right? I guess that's what we were seeing in the picture before. You have like a tear in your skin, and so your body fills in the gaps and kind of holds that all together. That's made up of slightly different tissue than your traditional skin. In your muscles, it's the same concept. This tissue is slightly different. It doesn't just repair back to where it normally was. So what we need to do is we need to be able to kind of break up that scar tissue in order to get the muscle to relax back to its normal length. And that's why foam rolling is so helpful. Generally, when we're placing a foam roller somewhere, we place it on the Golgi tendon organs near a muscle's like origin or near a muscle's insertion. But there are times where using it in the belly of the muscle, if there happens to be like a node, is what we call it, that's like a bundle of like scar tissue. And so you push that out and you kind of rub along the grain of the muscle. That kind of breaks all that up and allows you to get back to full length. That's what you're doing whenever you go get like a massage, right? And if anybody in here has ever gotten a massage, like they're working along, you're like, whatever, it's fine. Oh my God, scar tissue. So reciprocal inhibition is when one muscle relaxes, when one muscle contracts, the other relaxes. But if that doesn't happen the way it's supposed to, because of scar tissue or just because of like neurological programming, because you've just done something so many times one way, then you are going to have altered reciprocal inhibition, right? Which is where when one muscle doesn't relax, and so it decreases the neural drive of the other one. Think of it this way. Final little like analogy here. If I need to move 100, let's say I'm just at the gym and I'm trying to bench press 100 pounds, right? I need to be able to contract my pectoral muscles and deltoids and triceps and all that in order to overcome like 100 pounds worth of weight, okay? But let's say, actually, you know what? That's a bad example because nobody in the world has an overactive upper back. Flip it. Let's say I'm doing a 100-pound row, okay? I'm doing I got a row, I got a barbell, and I'm doing like a bent over 100-pound barbell row. Nothing too crazy, right? If I've got overactive pectoral muscles, which so many people do, right? In order to overcome that weight, I need to generate 101 pounds of force, right? I need to generate just a little bit more force than that 100 pounds in order to move it away from the floor. But if my chest muscles are constantly contracting in a horizontal adduction fashion or a, scapular protraction motion, let's say they are passively contracting for 10 pounds of force. Now, when I pull on that barbell, I don't need to pull for 100 pounds. I need to pull for 110 pounds because now I've got to pull against that weight and I've got to pull against my overactive muscle. So I'm losing how much tension I can generate in that opposite direction. Does that make sense to everybody? Does that example kind of track? Okay. So that's kind of what we're describing there. All right, so our predictable patterns of muscle imbalance that we've already talked about, we've got pronation distortion syndrome, right? That is going to be characterized by flattened or externally rotated feet. So what that person's experiencing in terms of altered reciprocal inhibition is that their gastrocnemius is so tight, it is decreasing the drive to their anterior and posterior tibialis. Their adductors are so tight that it's decreasing the drive to their gluteus medius and maximus. Their biceps femoris is so tight that it's decreasing the neural drive to their hip external rotators. So, you know, those muscles are keeping you from being able to move the way that you're supposed to. And so now, you know, with this position here, you know, somebody's going to move the way they're not really designed to move. This is what I like to call like a scooper. I don't know if I can actually find a good picture of this, but like a poor running technique, external rotation. I want to see. Ooh, there we go. Okay, we don't need that music. All right. So take a look at this guy here. Play. Are you going to show them side by side? Did I get punked? Okay, so take a look. You know, this is pretty slight, this guy. This must be like a series of videos because this is really, really, really slight. Do you see how this leg, like if you draw a line from his ASIS down to his knee, and you draw a line from his knee down to like his second and third toe, this is all very much in alignment. But if you draw a line here, his ASIS is here. Notice how his pelvis is slightly turned in this direction. Like it's almost like he's looking back over his shoulder, right? So he's slightly turned this way. So that's going to cause, we have to draw a line inward like this, right? There's an increase in his Q angle. And then that's, if we draw a line from his knee down to that second and third toe, we're going to see, you know, if we draw a line straight down, it's going to line up with like the center of his foot. But we can see like his foot is slightly externally rotated. He's got a pronation happening right here. This is what they're observing, by the way. If you've ever gone to like one of those run shops like Runnergy or what's the big pop, Roadrunner Sports, if you ever go to like any of those places and they put you on like a high-speed camera and they watch like your running form, this is the kind of stuff they're looking at. And this guy is not doing an over-exaggerated example. He's doing a very real-world example here. This is honestly the slight difference that most people will look like. Usually when I'm showing people this, I like to kind of over-exaggerate, but you'll see people, I just don't have enough room, I'm in my freaking room here. You'll see people scoop like that. And so they'll do this like big scooping motion. And what's happening, the reason they're scooping is because they're so good at plantar flexion that they're often like stepping off from that back toe, and then their overactive gastrocnemius muscle stays in this position here because their tibialis muscle won't pull their toe up. You pull your toe up, it's really easy to get to your next step, right? I'm at no risk of clipping my foot along the floor. But if I leave my toe like this, it's going to skip along the floor like that. And so what you'll see is what I like to call a scooper. You'll see somebody who will scoop their leg to the side, and that's an overactive gastrocnemius muscle. You can spot scoopers on stairways really easily. When people are going upstairs, you'll notice they'll turn their feet out like this, and that way their toe can get up over the step. They don't realize they're doing this, by the way. In fact, next time you guys are going up some stairs, check to see if you're a scooper. You may be a scooper. They're pretty easy. They're pretty easy to spot. You just have to look to see, are your toes going like this up the stairs, or are they lifting effectively? I am trying to figure out how to do this on camera. I literally normally have everybody go, all right, everybody stand up, show me your toes. All right. Then we got lower cross syndrome. Lower cross syndrome, another one of our most common, that is characterized by that anterior pelvic tilt, right? Again, we're going to see an overactive hip flexor complex is going to decrease the neural drive of our gluteus maximus. So this is so tight that this cannot contract. this is so tight. Then we're going to see an overactive erector spinae. This is so tight that this cannot contract, right? Your abdominals that are going to stabilize your spine in a neutral position. You cannot stay in that neutral position without it. So again, overactive on one side, underactive on the other. Forward head posture and rounded shoulders, right? Tight lats, tight pectorals, right? Lats causing the internal rotation, pectorals causing the protraction and adduction. Then we're going to see the scalenes, teres major, levator scap, and sternocleidomastoid, all those muscles inside the neck that cause like elevation and forward head, right? All of those are pulling too much, and they're decreasing the neural drive of all the muscles that get you back to a neutral posture. So that is a review of our static stuff. Now, most of what you're going to spend your time on when it comes to assessments is going to be NASM's overhead squat analysis. So the overhead squat is a really great assessment because it's similar to the static, right? It's looking for very similar things, but it is going to put stress on the entire kinetic chain. So the reason we like the overhead squat so much is because like by raising your arms up overhead, it puts stress on like the lats and your core has to like stabilize. Then you move through like a squat range of motion where we're going to be able to observe like how your hips are moving, right? So it relates to like squatting and pushing and pulling. These are your dynamic assessments, okay? So finally back to the first line here. Dynamic posture assessments. It's dynamic because it involves movement. Static involves no movement. Dynamic involves moving through a range of motion. So these are postural assessments that are oops, what did I write here? That relate to basic functions such as squatting, pushing, or pulling, pushing, pulling, or balancing, and put specific types of stress on the kinetic chain. Okay, so we are putting a very specific type of stress. Your overhead squat is going to be really the main one that we're going to spend most of our time talking about. So first, you need to know the definition, right? The overhead squat analysis. This is your definition for this. It is a postural assessment that is designed to assess dynamic flexibility instead of like static flexibility, and integrated total body strength. Okay, so that right there is like how it's defined in your textbook. Again, one of the favorite ways, you know, we've all, at this point, you guys are getting probably pretty familiar with how NASM likes to ask questions, but, you know, blank is an assessment that is designed to assess dynamic flexibility and integrated total body strength. You know, option A, the overhead squat analysis. So that is how you want to kind of get familiar to using this language, right? So our position for this is going to be body position, feet, stand with feet shoulder width apart and toes pointed straight ahead. A foot and ankle complex in a neutral position. Oh, and actually, quick side note, shoes off. Do this without your shoes on. There are way too many running shoes in today's world that have a super elevation on the heel because, you know, they're running shoes. And so running, you know, you're impacting your heel. Debatable. But like a lot of shoes put you into plantar flexion. So then your client doesn't have to like dorsiflex as much when they squat down, and that alters the length and makes the assessment easier. And now you're not getting an accurate depiction. So always do your overhead squat with shoes off. I will say one thing that sucks, if you do work in commercial gyms, you know, 9 out of 10 times you're not going to get caught, but your boss may yell at you for having somebody take their shoes off. You are not supposed to be shoeless on the gym floor. But at the same time, it's the most effective way to do that assessment. So, you know, hang the rules. So then you're going to have your client raise his or her arms overhead with elbows fully extended, right? So no bend in the elbows here. The upper arms should bisect the ears, AKA they should be in alignment with your ears. They should be on the same line. If you look from the side, you shouldn't be able to see some of these ears because their biceps are blocking your view. Then all you're gonna have them do for the movement is you are going to instruct the client to squat to a comfortable, controlled squatting position, right? And then repeat as many times as necessary for you to observe. Now, you are going to observe from 2 different views, okay? So your observations. In your regular textbook, it is going to be from an anterior view and from a lateral view. So that's primarily what we're going to focus on. However, once you guys get to capstone, you're also going to move into a posterior view. So we got 3 different views here. What I like to do actually during my assessments, and this is not something that you're going to find in your book, but the way I like to do assessments is I like to have somebody do a set from the anterior view, and I'll actually have them do more reps than I really need them to. Because I want that assessment to feel a little bit like a workout. You know, if I have somebody do a 3-minute step test and then I have them do like an overhead squat, I'm gonna have them go do a push-pull assessment. I can kind of make that feel a little bit like a first-time workout. And, you know, one of my favorite compliments that I'll ever get is somebody at the end of an assessment go, wow, that was actually a pretty good workout today. And then I go, oh, that was not the workout. That was the assessment. That was nothing like the workout. And then they go, oh God, I have to work with this guy, you know? So that's actually one of my favorite techniques here. So I'll often do, you know, I'll just stay in one view. If you don't want to do it that way, you can always walk around your client as you're observing them, right? You can take note up on the front, have them keep squatting, take a note from the side, and take a note from the back. You know, both methods are really effective. So your observation views, we're going to look at the anterior first. So from your anterior view, you are going to look at the foot and ankle complex and the knees. From a lateral view, you are going to observe the lumbopelvic hip complex. And the shoulder complex. And then from a posterior view, again, not in your regular textbooks, so you're probably not going to have any test questions in this course about the posterior view. You're going to look at the heel and lumbopelvic hip complex. Okay, so you are looking to see, actually, you know what? I shouldn't say heel, I should just say foot and ankle complex. Okay, so those are your main, oh, I don't like that. Those are the main sections you're looking at here. I like that, that's fine. From the anterior view, again, you're looking at the foot first. So the first thing you're looking at from the anterior view, do their feet turn out, okay? So on the overhead squat, you're looking to observe as they like go into position, right? They're gonna squat like this. Feet are hip width apart, and they should be squatting down like so, okay? You are going to look to see if they turn their feet out like that. If they do, that means that their calf muscle is resisting going into dorsiflexion, right? So if you look at like a lateral view of the overhead squat, right? I'm just going to pull up a lateral view here. We got to remember Actually, okay, I guess I'm going to see it on my next slide anyways. I need to pull up that picture. All right, so if you look at how her shin comes forward, right? Like a squatting is you're going into dorsiflexion. This is actually one of the reasons why we refer to a squat like as a motion. We call it triple extension because you are extending at the ankle complex, you're extending at the knee complex, and you're extending at the hip complex. So when you're sitting into that, you are sitting into triple flexion. So if you're sitting in a triple flexion and you're resisting one of those types of flexion, right? For instance, if you're resisting dorsiflexion, what's going to happen is your body's going to find a way to lean forward instead, or your body's just going to simply turn your feet out to the side. That way that muscle doesn't have to actually stretch out. So your body is finding the path of least resistance in order to kind of get the job done. We actually have a term for that. We call that relative flexibility. So it's like, yeah, you were flexible enough to do a squat, but you were doing like your version of a squat. It's relative to you, not the real squat, right? That's relative flexibility. It's like, yeah, you got the job done, but you didn't move how you're designed to move. The other version we're going to see are knees caving in, right? So we're going to see a client. You also might see the knee wobble, by the way. And the knee wobble is basically you mark it as knees caving in. So if I'm going up like this, I've got a slight knee wobble myself. So if I squat down like so, and I come back up, you'll see just a little squeeze like that, just temporarily. And that's knees caving in, right? Basically what's happening is my adductor muscles are like, we got it, and then they contract. They're not supposed to. So it's altering my posture, right? Then we're gonna see the lateral view here, right? On the lateral view, there's a couple different, actually, you know what? I need to put those in your notes. I'm getting ahead of myself. So movement. You know what? Yeah, let's go to here. Overhead squat movement compensations. Okay, and actually, I'm gonna pull up this chart. NASM.org downloads. Downloads. Is this the right one? No, that's the assessment itself. Postural distortions. That is the regular version. I want the corrected version. Thanks, not NASM's website. Okay, so here are our overhead solutions table, right? So I'm gonna zoom in as much as I can in case you guys can't see this. But if we look at the feet turning out, right? So the checkpoint, we're looking at the foot. Our compensation, the foot turns out. Our probable overactive muscles, right? Let's go ahead and get these on the list. So movement compensations we're gonna look at first are going to be foot turns out. Okay, probable overactive muscles. So these are the ones that are in a shortened state, right? That is going to be your soleus, lateral gastrocnemius, right? So particularly the outside part of your calf, biceps femoris, particularly the short head, right? Remember that short head. That is those fibers that cause external tibial rotation. And then we're going to see the tensor fascia latae, or TFL, right? So those are your probable overactive muscles. If we look at our probable underactive muscles, right? This list is going to be all of the antagonists, or, by the way, it's not always, I just realized I should have mentioned this earlier. It's not always altered reciprocal inhibition that's causing alterations around a joint. Sometimes it is also synergistic dominance. Synergistic dominance is where a synergist muscle is doing more work than it's supposed to. So for instance, this is an example of that, right? probable underactive muscles are going to be your medial gastrocnemius. Right, those are not necessarily antagonists of each other, right? Like your lateral gastrocnemius and your medial, they work together to perform plantar flexion. So they're synergists to each other. But if one synergist is doing more work than the other one, right, it's taking over and becoming more overactive. The other muscle can't do its job. So your medial gastrocnemius is not an example of altered reciprocal inhibition. It's an example of synergistic dominance. And I should have mentioned that earlier. I missed it in the PowerPoint, and so I forgot to say it myself. Medial hamstring, same concept, although that one actually is internal rotation. That is an example of altered reciprocal inhibition, right? Your lateral hamstring turns your foot like this, your medial hamstring turns your foot like that. So that's an opposite one. Gluteus maximus, gluteus medius, right? And then your gracilis and your popliteus, which are two muscles that we haven't spent too much time talking about, but those are both stabilizer muscles. Your gracilis does a little bit of the rotation. Your popliteus is actually this little itty bitty tiny muscle right in the back of your knee that stabilizes your knee. If you have poor stability because you just haven't been training for stability in your knee, you know, your body's going to turn your foot away to use primarily like your quads and hamstring muscles, which are really large. Then it doesn't have to rely on stabilizer muscles. So that little stabilizer is underactive. If you want to activate your gracilis, you need to do balancing, like single leg work. Okay, so that's our foot turnout. That's our first problem we're going to see. Do you guys have any questions about that? How are we doing so far? That's the one we're going to primarily spend some time talking about today.
Great.
Great. All right. Let's take a look at the other one that we're going to primarily spend some time on today. Let's look at the knees cave in. Right. So knees cave in, that adduction and internal rotation, it also often causes like eversion of the foot. Like, you know, we're often seeing like pronation. So knees caving in, we are going to see probable overactive muscles. This is going to be your adductor complex, right? Obviously, if you're experiencing adduction. The biceps femoris, particularly short head, right? So again, remember, adduction is causing internal rotation of this leg. Now this is external in comparison to my other one. So basically I've turned my foot like that, right? So I've activated that evil hamstring muscle. That muscle is like my mortal enemy. Then you get your tensor fascia latae, just like before. TFL. So you'll notice this list, by the way, looks exactly the same as pronation distortion, right? If your client doesn't sit this way statically, but then you put more stress on their body and you observe this, that's what we're really describing here, right? It doesn't mean that the muscles are underactive just because they look neutral when they're standing. If they become underactive while they're doing something that's more stressful, like a squat, and then they experience that, those are the overactive muscles. By the way, this is not like a contest. Like your clients, you know, we want to strive for like good posture, but like we are going to continue to make the assessments harder because it gives us a guiding point for how to design our program. I'm not trying to like tear my clients down and be like, you suck at this. You know, like that's not our goal here. The reason we put more, like we start with static, and then if we don't find anything, we move on to overhead. And if we don't find anything, we're going to move on to a harder test called the LESS test, which I'm going to show you in just a second. And that is way more advanced. And, you know, like, don't get me wrong, like if you go looking for something and you finally find it, like, you know, is it really a problem? In the world of posture, yes. Because we're looking at things that we should be moving neutrally. I'm not purposely pulling you into external rotation. You're doing it because that's how your body's designed. So that's why the knee wobble counts. You know, like a lot of trainers, I'll see people like do the overhead squat and they'll squat and they'll just very minorly move out of alignment. And I see this all the time. Trainers will go, yeah, you move a little bit out of alignment. It's not that big a deal. I'm like, duh. No, it's not. Like, it's not that big a deal. Like, they're probably not at that much risk for injury. But like, as you are looking for like them moving in ways that they're not designed to move, they are recruiting the wrong muscles. So if you start to like lift heavier and heavier and heavier weight, they could eventually cause like a breakdown. We want to get them back to neutral when it's not a big deal. We don't want to wait till it's a big deal, then try to work against it. Sorry, that was my soapbox. Vastus lateralis, right? That quadriceps muscle on the lateral outside part of the quadriceps. And then again, lateral gastrocnemius again. So again, all those muscles that cause either like pronation, right? Or like a knees caving in motion. And those two are often associated with each other, which is why we're looking at the two of them today. So then our probable underactive muscles, we are going to see the gluteus maximus and medius. We're going to see the vastus, medialis, oblique, or your VMO. That's that inner quadriceps muscle on the inside part of the teardrop, right? We're also going to see the medial hamstring, and we're going to see the medial gastrocnemius. So the inside portions, right? Again, this person is pulling into external rotation. We need to get them, I'm sorry, they're pulling into internal rotation. We need to get them back into normal external rotation in order to get them back to neutral. So those are some examples of like what muscles are very overactive. And those are the two that we're primarily going to be looking at today. Now, there is another common problem here that we are going to tackle once you guys get to capstone, and that is knees caving out. So this is what we call knee varus. And it's exactly the opposite problem of knees cave in. This is a less common issue, but if you look at like knee varus, this is that bow-legged posture that you'll sometimes see someone have. So knee valgus, right? Again, that is the knees caving inward, right? We see an excessive Q angle. Then we see neutral posture, and then we see this version, like bow-legged, right? Bow-legged squat. So you'll sometimes see somebody. It's so hard to find pictures of this because it's just not very common. Oh my God. We'll take 1 second to look at this dog. That's really cute, actually. All right. Yeah, God, there's just never examples of it. Please, internet, help me out. We're seeing so many like actual knock-kneed people. Yeah, I mean, you want to have some knee, you want to have some push out on your knees when you're doing a barbell squat. Like these are all actually pretty, like this is pretty good. His knee is in line with this slight external rotation here. The problem is when somebody does it and they invert their foot at the same time. So you'll see people who will do this version. Well, they'll invert their feet. They'll have this like big gap under the bottom of their feet and their knees will cave like crazy. That is actually overactive external rotators. So your probable overactive muscles here are going to be your piriformis, right? That little short muscle at the top of your pelvis, right? It runs from your sacrum over to your greater trochanter. It is an external rotator, right? So this person's externally rotating. Then we're going to see the biceps femoris, but we're not just seeing the short head. This is the entire lateral hamstring. Because remember, the lateral hamstring is in charge of that whole external rotation, right? So it's not just the short head anymore, it's the whole muscle. Then we are going to see the tensor fascia latae again, which is sometimes kind of surprising because like that's an internal rotator. But remember, it's also a hip flexor. So the hip flexion part of it. And then we're actually going to see some glutes here. Glutes are going to be on our overactive muscle list, but not your gluteus maximus. It's going to be your gluteus minimus and your gluteus medius. Okay, so in this case, it is some of your glute muscles, but it's your glute minimus, which is eventually part of that TFL. So again, it's responsible for some of that flexion. But then your gluteus medius, which is in charge of that abduction, right? So this is an example of synergistic dominance, right? A lot of times it's altered reciprocal inhibition. A lot of times we jump to the other side of the joint in order to find our underactive muscle, right? It's like, I got overactive here. I'm going to jump to the other side of the joint. There's my underactive muscle, right? Hip flexor to glute, right? Those are opposites of each other. But in this example, it's your medial glute, which is in charge of like abduction, doing more work than your maximal glute, which is hip extension. So this is an example of synergistic dominance at play here. Same thing with the piriformis. So our probable underactive muscles. This is kind of like, Jay, you remember just before everybody got on the call the other day, we were talking about how like I've got a problem with, you know, the low back rounding, right? And that posterior pelvic tilt. A lot of people think that because your glute muscles are in charge of hip extension, which is similar to posterior tilting, a lot of people think that the glutes are overactive. It's not that the glutes are overactive. They're actually, they're underactive, just like in anterior pelvic tilt. But a lot of people make that assumption because they're going, you know, altered reciprocal. We get so used to looking for opposites and altered reciprocal inhibition, we forget to look at synergists. In this case, like my gluteus maximus, which is a synergist, isn't turning on the way it's supposed to because it's being inhibited by a synergist. Rather than the opposite side of the joint. We'll look at that in a little bit. Actually, we'll look at that tomorrow when we get into the rounding and stuff. So those are your probable overactive and probable underactive muscles for that. In briefly. Let's get back to the knees caving out. Adductor complex are underactive. Medial hamstring is underactive, and gluteus maximus. Right, so if you got a client who has that like bow-legged posture, they actually want to work on squeezing their thighs together. They want to work on their medial hamstring. So when they're doing hamstring curls, you got to make sure they don't let their foot turn out like this. If anything, you almost want them to have a foot turned in posture. Although that's not great either. Just go to neutral. And then gluteus maximus, lots and lots and lots of hip extension. So those are some of the primary ones. I'm gonna go ahead and this is the two that we're gonna look at today. We're gonna look and design a program for these two today. So that's your anterior view. Your lateral view, we start looking at the pelvis, right? But I am not going to go super in depth with each of these because we're about to go super in depth over the rest of the next few days. So those are our only probable overactives and underactives we're going to talk about today. We're going to be revisiting this list actually here in a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move this from this file. You can keep this in your notes, by the way, but if I were you, make sure you're going to be able to draw back to your notes like later. I'm going to compile these onto one big list. So I'll copy instead of cutting, and we'll put that right there. And that's what we're going to work on after the lecture. So zooming back in here. All right, let's look at our lateral view. We are also going to see low back arch. Right, very, very, very common postural distortion. So when you see somebody squat, they have this big overarching posture here. Now, low back arch is a little bit complicated, and that's why we're not getting into it on day one. But to give you like a brief overview, what's happening is there's sort of a combination of two things. If their pelvis is being pulled anteriorly, like in a static posture, right, that will obviously cause a low back arch because their back is already arched as they start to squat. So they're going to have that like real intense, like Donald Duck butt, right? But alternatively, they could, if they were like squatting, like let's say you didn't do the overhead squat and you just had them squat like this, they might squat totally neutral and normal, right? But then as soon as you do the overhead portion, if they get that low back arch, those are going to be two different problems, right? Like one is being caused by like the pelvis and one is being caused by like when I raise my arms up, what's pulling away causing that arch to happen, right? So let's say I'm up here and I have a really intense low back arch, right? That is very much because of my lat muscles, right? Remember the lat muscles do a little bit of weak spinal extension. So as I stretch my lats out, because I'm pulling them into, you know, I'm going into shoulder flexion and I'm in abduction, right? My arm's all the way up here. My lat's being pulled into this lengthened position. If my lat doesn't want to go into that position, it's going to pull somewhere else and make me compensate. So a low back arch can be caused by two different things, which means if you observe a low back arch in your client, you need to do the overhead squat assessment again with an adjustment. And so what you do, if your client low back arches with their arms overhead, you need to tell them, okay, we saw a low back arch, therefore I need you to take your arms down. And so you're going to have them rest their arms at their side and do that squat again. If they still have a low back arch, then the arms had no effect. Therefore, your overactive muscles are all of those muscles in the pelvis, okay? It's all this stuff. But if the low back arch goes away, then the overactive muscles are their lats because you took the stress away from the lats, therefore the lats were causing it, okay? Does that make sense? Cool.
Yeah.
Same thing, exact same thing from the lateral view. If you have a client who does an excessive forward lean, so let's say you're having them squat and they squat like this. Okay, that is an excessive forward lean. How do we know it's an excessive forward lean? Because when I'm observing it, if my lines intersect, right, I'm going to draw a line from my ankle up to my knee that will continue traveling, and I'm going to draw another line from my shoulder to my hip. If those lines cross each other, that's an excessive forward lean. An ideal squat should look like this. These lines should be able to travel infinitely in both directions forever without compensation. Squat. I want to show you my favorite squatter. Squat University. This guy rocks. Barbell squat. There we go. So he's breaking this down too. He actually has a really cool video on how to squat properly. But you can see, right, this is an inadequate forward lean. This is an excessive forward lean. And then here, right, this is kind of ideal, although he's got a little bit of like low back rounding here. Like that's actually not too bad. But take a look, you can see if you draw a line from his heel up to his knee and draw another line from here to here, right, those lines are parallel to each other. This line intersects with this one. There's another one he's got a better picture. There we go. So again, see how these are never going to cross each other, right? They could go on infinitely in both directions. Actually, this one's much better. Sorry, these are pretty good. I was like looking at the wrong picture here. These are going to intersect. My eyes are crooked. This here, right? These are not going to intersect with each other. That's a nice, you know.
So the picture on the left is the right way?
Yeah, the one on the left is. I was looking at this, I was like, they look parallel, but he's just not giving an exaggerated example, and so I fell for it. But yeah.
The other picture, though, he goes all the way to the floor. I mean, that seems a little excessive. Is that?
Yeah, you can do that, by the way. Like if you do the I like to call it the ass to grass squats, right? If you do go all the way down like that, that's actually fine as long as you're still doing it with proper alignment. Like if I try to go super low like that, like what's weird is I can actually do it a little bit better on a barbell squat. But like, let's say like, I go down to about here, the alignment's not bad. If I try to drop real low like this, I pretty much have to take my hips into external alignment. And then you see how I'm doing this big, intense low back arching?
Yeah, that looks bad.
Rounding, like way too much low back rounding. That's putting way too much pressure on my discs. So if I do that on a barbell squat, I'm asking for trouble because I don't have that hip mobility. But if you can go that low and you can do it with proper alignment, that's actually okay.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. You just have to have proper alignment. Do not, like so many people like get stuck on their squat for years and don't improve because they try to go super low over and over and over and they just learn how to do it wrong. And then eventually you're just hurting yourself. Like you're, not learning the good form.
Is it possible you could show us right now how low is acceptable?
What's that?
Would you be able to demonstrate how low is acceptable?
So that's going to be different. That's going to be depend on your client themselves, right? Like, acceptable is as low as your client can go without compensating. As soon as they compensate, you're done. But it gets better and better and better. Like I'll start my client with like a little quarter squat, then a half squat, and eventually, like once they know how to do it properly, then we can do a full.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So these are the things we're looking at, right? We got low back arch and arms fall forward, which both have special adjustments that need to be made to them, right? The last one you're going to look at, wait, did I say arms fall forward? Sorry, I got distracted. My phone was blowing. Low back arch and excessive forward lean. The last one we're going to look at is arms fall forward. And this one's really simple. If your client they're so tight they can't hold their arms up, right? Tight lats in its most basic form. Okay? So let's go ahead and get back onto the list over here. So excessive forward lean. Tight muscles here you're going to see two lists, but they're not really like, they're not separated. So an excessive forward lean could be caused from tight calves, or it is caused by tight hip flexors and abdominals. Seems kind of crazy, but yes, your abs are actually overactive in this case.
That's me.
Yeah, totally. Me too. But here's the thing. It's not all of your abs. It's just your mover abs. It's your six pack. So what this means, Kenny, when it's overactive is we have spent too much time doing this and not enough time doing that.
I agree.
It's too much crunching. Like, for me, it's teaching group exercise. I've spent all this time doing all these group exercise boot camps where I'm leading people through like a series of crunch movements, right?
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, and it's honestly a mistake that a lot of group exercise instructors make. I made it in my early years and I'm still paying for it,
Overtraining.
And so like a lot of that, you get so good at pulling yourself towards the ground. So what ends up happening,
Pretty much.
In some people, they're going to get the exact lean. In my case, I actually get the low back rounding, which is where basically the front of my pelvis is being, normally we think of crunching as crunching your top towards your bottom. In my case, my bottom coming up towards my top. So it's a posterior, and that's posteriorly tilting my pelvis. So when I squat down, you'll notice that's my natural squat right there. You see that little tucking that happens, the butt wink at the bottom.
That's what we have to do, the prone cobra, right?
Exactly, yeah. Prone cobra is going to be the exact opposite. That's going to work on hip extension, or the spinal extension.
Right.
So if somebody has an excessive forward lean, you got to figure out, is it the hips and abs or is it the calves, right? So what you do in order to figure that out is you actually take the stretch away from one of them. Now, I can't remove the stretch from somebody's like abs while they're doing a squat, but I can elevate the heels. If I put like a plate under somebody's heel, what that's going to do is basically it's going to be like squatting in high heels. So then they end up squatting like this, right? Which takes the stretch away from the soleus and the gastrocnemius. That taking away of the soleus and gastrocnemius stretch is going to mean that now my client is, if the excessive forward lean goes away, the problem was the calves. If the excessive forward lean stays, then I know that the problem is the hips and abs. So there's two ways. Generally, what NASM recommends is taking plates and putting them on the floor, and then having your client step onto those. Sometimes what I'll have my clients do, since I'm having them do this without their shoes, if there are no plates available, I will take their shoes and have them step onto the front of them with their heels and have them squat down. And if the lean goes away, I know that the problem was their calves. If the lean stays, I know the problem is their hips.
Is it possible to have both? I mean, I'm sure it is, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can have overactivity anywhere, it just depends on, like, if you see some improvement, and those things are often, that means they've also been squatting that way for a while if they have been working out. So they've probably developed overactivity in that other way. So it's definitely possible to have both.
I really enjoy this part of the course because, I mean, it seems like it's NASM's, thumbprint with the overhead squat. And
yeah, I mean, they didn't invent it or anything. I mean, like, this is popular amongst a lot of people. Like, if you want to, like, Jay, you were saying you want to work at Equinox, right? Like, Equinox will have you do, like, this version. I've kept this in here since kinesiology, and I haven't used it yet. But they'll have you do, like, the overhead squat with a broomstick overhead. Not obviously with an actual broom, but just the stick.
Yeah, the stick, yeah.
And they'll have you, they'll have you do the same thing. It's a really, but it's all a variation. Like, the reason we like squatting is because it puts stress on these major kinetic chain checkpoints, right? It's stressing the ankle, knee, hip. And then when you take your arms overhead, you're adding the shoulder in there. But it doesn't address so much in the neck, which is why we've got pushing and pulling assessments on Monday.
We do.
What's that?
Yeah, pushing and pulling on Monday, you said?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to mention low back rounds right now, and then arms fall forward. We're going to put these here, but we're going to leave them blank because we're going to get into the probable overactive is underactive when we get to these sections on Monday. So Monday, we're going to dive into the pushing and pulling assessment. That's also where we'll dive into excessive lean and low back arch. And the reason we're waiting until that day is because you'll notice the low back arch muscles are pretty similar on the pushing and pulling as they are on the overhead. So they pair up really well. And then we'll continue moving from there. So that's about it for the overhead squat. You're going to look for, you know what? One other one that we're going to see when you get to capstone. This isn't in your regular textbook, but from the posterior view, you are going to look for foot flattens, heels rise, and asymmetrical weight shift. Okay. Asymmetrical weight shift's a real pain in the butt, but basically that's when somebody squats, they sit into one side. Basically, they got knees caving in over here and knees caving out over here. So you need to solve both problems on opposite legs. Foot flattens is basically E version, and heel rise is just like excessive forward lean. Basically, rather than leaning forward, they squatted properly, but they did it by just raising their heel. They get to put themselves into plantar flexion on their own. And that's usually the soleus alone by itself that does that. So those are sort of where we're headed. We're going to get these. On Monday, as well as like when we get into the pushing and the pulling stuff. But I do need to really quickly. Yeah, question.
Is Monday a holiday?
I don't know. 25th. Oh my God, is it Memorial Day on Monday?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is. I mean, we're doing Monday or we get?
Yes, okay. Is it? It's gotta be. Crap, I have not heard officially, but yes, it will be. Memorial Day is like always observed by Sochi. I'll
Okay,
have to text my boss to be like really official and make 100% certain, but like I'm like 99.9% certain. Yeah. So I've been saying Monday this whole video, Tuesday.
Yes.
um,
Any word with the you and Mo on classes in person?
yeah, we're trying to get it together. He and I are trying to get our schedules to sync up. He's got
Okay.
his own stuff going on in Capstone, but yeah, we're going to try and get it this week. Well, next week.
Next week.
That's going to throw a wrench in the works. We weren't planning on Monday, but hopefully that doesn't goof everything up.
Sounds like a plan.
All right. Last little bit. I just don't want to get the because you're going to get homework questions about it. Single leg squat assessment, and that's the last little bit that we're going over today, right? Oh yeah, I got to teach you the less test. So single leg squat assessment. This is going to be just like your overhead squat, except that it's very dynamic. So your overhead squat is a posture assessment that is designed to assess dynamic flexibility and integrated total body strength. You're going to notice that sentence sounds really similar to this one. The single leg squat assessment is designed to assess ankle proprioception, core strength, and hip joint stability. So pretty darn similar to your overhead squat, except this one is actually testing your proprioception. It's testing your balance, right? That's why it's on one leg. So your position Had I do this before? Body position. Okay. So body position is going to be client will stand and place their hands on their waist. And focus on an object straight ahead. Feet and toe, I'm gonna say foot and ankle, should be neutral and pointed straight ahead. Knee and LPHC should be in a neutral position. Okay, so that's your starting client position. You're gonna get them into optimal alignment first. And then your movement is going to be instruct client to raise one leg and accept their weight on the opposite leg. That's their stance leg. Foot should be lifted next to the stance leg. So a big mistake a lot of people make when they do the overhead squat is they do it like this, and then they try to squat down. You do not need to have this in a full hip flex position. It can rest just an inch or two right next to your other leg. In fact, you kind of want to do that because you're probably used to normal squats. So foot should be right next to your stance leg. Have the client squat to a comfortable position, right? Perform 3 to 5 reps and repeat. Okay, so they're going to squat down to a comfortable position. Now, you only have one view on this. The single leg squat is actually pretty darn simple, which is, again, why we're talking about it today. So your observation views is only going to be anterior. I do this before? Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure I'm being consistent here. Yeah. So you're only going to look at the anterior view, and you are going to observe the knee complex. So you're just looking at the knees there. Nothing else. And basically what you're looking for, do their knees cave in? Oh, wait, no. Not doing that right. Yeah, single leg squat movement compensation. Okay, so you're gonna look to see if their knees cave in. Probable overactive muscles. Ironically, it's actually gonna be the same thing. You're not gonna see any difference here between your overhead squat and your single leg squat. So if we go back up, again, that's gonna be the adductor complex, your biceps femoris short head, TFL, fasciis lateralis, and lateral gastrocnemius. So we're just gonna go ahead and copy this list straight down right here. Because it is exactly the same list. So, you know, a lot of times people will ask me the first time they're studying this, they're like, well, it's the same list. Why the hell are we doing it? You know, like, because again, you are putting greater stress on your client. If they did their normal squat well, let's give them more stress and see if they can still do it properly. Now, if you get through the overhead squat and their squat's perfect, and you get through their single leg squat and their squat's perfect, and you need one more final advanced version of a test, we are going to look at the landing error scoring system, which is a plyometric explosive jumping assessment. Now, again, if they get all the way through that and they also don't have any movement compensations, congratulations, you are training the world's easiest client. They have perfect posture already, so you can just go nuts on them. But if you ever have that person, let me know, because I'd love to meet them. So let's look at the LESS test here. Landing error scoring system. So this, unfortunately, is not in any of the materials you guys have yet. This is going to be found in your sports performance textbook. So we haven't given this to you guys yet because it's a sports performance test. But basically, this one it actually works a little differently. Let me see if I can find a video of it actually. Hey, there's an awesome video. Let's see if it's any good. Oh, it's a PowerPoint. We're already in the middle of a PowerPoint. We're not doing another one. All right, here we go.
Assessment. This is a great test for indicating if an athlete has a risk for injury during jumping and landing movements. It's a good test for most sports because most sports include jumping. This will be based on a 13 yes/no questionnaire assessed by a sports performance professional. The lower the score, the less risk of injury. It begins using a 12-inch platform, and there will be a mark out in front of the platform that is half of the height.
Okay, so they're going to jump off of a 12-inch platform, so 1 foot. And then what you're going to do is you're going to mark how tall your client is. I'm 6 foot, so you would put a 3-foot mark away. I don't have a 12-inch box, but I do have my blankets chest here. So if I were standing here, like on this, right, and there would be a mark 3 feet in front of me, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump off using both feet. I'm not going to jump like this. I'm going to jump with both legs simultaneously, and I'm going to land, and then I'm going to, almost like a depth jump straight back up in the air. So it would look like this. Make sure I don't punch my ceiling. So that is how we do the landing error scoring system. So I'm going to show you, you know what, actually I should just turn it. I was going to show you a sideways jump. But basically you'll have somebody stand like this, and then they will jump off. You're going to observe from the front, right? So they'll jump back up. And you'll notice, because I do have sort of a bad habit when I jump, which is exactly what you're looking for. If I jump here, watch my knees very quickly. Notice how I kind of sit into one side. That's a bad habit. So that is something that would get marked on my sheet. I'd probably give me a 2 on that. You're going to mark it with either 1s or 2s. The LESS test is like golf. You want your score to be as low as possible. All right, so that's a brief explanation. Let's watch the rest of the video.
Of the athlete 2 feet, land on 2 feet, jump straight up, and then repeat the process. The evaluation begins with the athlete standing on top of the platform, jumping off the platform.
As a kid.
Off of 2 feet, landing in front of the mark.
Oh boy, this kid.
On 2 feet, squatting down, jumping straight up with no pause in between. They will repeat this process 3 times. Then the professional should be recording the athlete jumping from the front and from the right side. This will give a good view of flexion, extension, and movement within the cervical plane to start the assessment questionnaire. Starting position, both feet are on the box. His arms will swing back before he jumps. In this next frame, we can see that his knees and hips are in line before he begins to take off. Now we can see that his knees are turning inward and his toes are starting to pronate, which is putting him in a compromised position to begin.
He's got me. He's got the
Now
asymmetric
we'll be
shift.
asking questions that will be giving a yes/no answer, and based on that yes/no, will be given a 0 or a 1 point. The higher the score, the more movement deficiencies the athlete possesses, and the greater risk for injury.
I just realized I lied. Yeah, it's not a 1 or a 2. It's a 0 or a 1. Sorry.
Is there trunk flexion on contact with the ground? No, so he gets a 0. Is there lateral trunk flexion at contact? And he is vertical, so he also gets a 0 for that. Initial foot contact is symmetric. Stance is not greater than or less than shoulder width, so he gets a 0 for both of those questions. There is no ankle plantar flexion, so he gets a 0 for that.
Ankle plantar flexion, what they're describing, by the way, is when somebody lands. I'm actually going to jump up onto this box, but what they'll do is they'll sometimes land like this, where they'll stay like in a position where they land on their toes. That's what they're talking about. So far his alignment's pretty good. She hasn't gotten to the hips yet. This kid, his ankle complex isn't so bad, but it's his lumbopelvic hip complex where we're going to start to see most of his compensations.
Next, we look at foot position, internally or externally rotated greater than 30 degrees, and he does not have that either, so a 0 for both of those. We can see at initial contact he has knee valgus, so he gets a 1 for that.
Right.
You can see his knee flexion angle is greater than 30 degrees, so he gets a 0 for that. Next, we see that his hips are flexed at initial contact, which gives him a 0, and his hip flexion at maximum knee angle is more than initial contact, and that is no, so he gets a 1 for that. Here we can also see there is not more trunk flexion than at initial contact.
Sorry, AKA what she meant with that last one, the reason he's getting a 1, there is too much excessive forward lean.
So he gets a 0. This athlete will receive a score of 6, which indicates a slight risk of injury and that his movement patterns need to be adjusted to help him. The pros of this test are they're easy, inexpensive, they're valuable for risk assessment, and the cons are based on the professional's assessment. So I hope you understand the landing error score system.
Okay, so let's take a look. So I know some of those things we moved through pretty quick. I want to show you the actual scoring chart. This is what that's going to look like. So basically it's like a little questionnaire rather than like, you know, is somebody moving a certain way? So is their stance width normal? Then they get a 0. But if it was too wide or too narrow, you're going to give them 1 point. So basically you're just going to have them do multiple reps of this. And you're just looking for each of these. Honestly, the way we used to do it, just do 10 of them, you know, and look for each thing first. Pay attention to stance width on the first one, pay attention to foot rotation on the next one, have them do 10 repetitions. It's not a bad way to have it done. Unless they aren't really like a super advanced client, which then maybe you shouldn't be doing this assessment anyways. But if 10 reps is too many, but you're just looking for all of this. It's really cool when you have a camera set up to actually like videotape this kind of stuff, because then you can slow the footage down. But basically you're just looking like, is their contact symmetrical, right? Are they landing with one leg forward? Then it's not symmetrical. Do they have maximum knee valgus, right? Do they have like very little knee valgus or like a lot of knee valgus? Is there a lot of like lateral trunk flexion? Sometimes you'll see somebody who will like me, for instance, like I tend to sit into one side. Do they land heel to toe, or do they land toe to heel, or do they land flat? Landing heel to toe, which is very painful, like that, right? Good God. That is obviously not great, right? You can hear it when they land. Same thing with like flat feet. Knee flexion displacement. What they're talking about there is like, remember knee flexion is this, right? So are their knees traveling super far past their toes, or are they in a neutral alignment? And then trunk flexion displacement, same concept. Total joints displacement in the sagittal plane, right? Are they landing very stiff, or are they like softly distributing their weight the way they're supposed to? And then you just do an overall impression at the end, like, you know, how did they look while they were jumping? So the higher the score, the more at risk that athlete is for an injury. We'll look at this in person. I will remember that we did not get to do this like very well in person. We're going to do this in person when we get to the park too. But like, I will probably do, like, Mo and I have already been talking about this. We're probably going to do like a workshop day where we cover some of the stuff. Like, we're going to be like, all right, now that we're back in the real world, let's do an overall day of like crap that we missed. And we're just going to kind of freeform it. It'll probably be in capstone, because that's where Mo tends to have the most free time, whereas like the core tends to be kind of structured. But we'll do a whole day on the LESS test and some of the other sports performance assessments. But basically, start with your static postural assessment. If you don't see anything, do the overhead squat. You should do the overhead squat anyways, but sometimes your clients aren't eligible, like, you know, senior client who might not be able to do it. If you still don't see anything, do the single leg squat. If you still don't see anything, do the LESS test. And you can see, like, we watched that kid, right? If we go back to that video of that kid, right from the beginning, we're starting to see a little bit of like overactive, underactive muscles, right? Immediately, mute. We see a knee cave in, right? He's got a kind of a forward lean. He tends to flatten his feet, right? We start to see a lot of like those movement compensations. So it can still tell you, it can be very similarly used to your overhead squat. And that is all of the assessments for the day. Let's build a program, shall we? How you guys feeling?
Good.
All right, let's take a look at an OPT template. Okay. So this is going to be our example: feet turn out, knees cave in client. We're going to put them into phase 1. So we're going to focus on stabilization. So as we look at this, we got to look at our probable overactive muscles for feet turning out and knees caving in, right? So overactive soleus, laterogastrocnemius, biceps femoris, and TFL, as well as adductors, biceps femoris again, TFL again, gastrocnemius again, and vastus lateralis. So we are seeing a whole bunch of muscles show up on this list twice. So we are definitely going to prioritize foam rolling the hamstrings, right? Because that is part of that biceps femoris. Now, for the record, your biceps femoris, that little short muscle, is a real pain in the butt to get with a foam roller. It's hidden behind other layers of muscles, and then it inserts hidden behind your freaking knee joint. So foam rolling your biceps femoris is challenging, but what you can do is you can use a lacrosse ball and you can actually sit into a chair and take that lacrosse ball back behind your thigh. It's a really great way to get into that biceps femoris. And yeah, it can be a little tight and it can be a little painful sometimes. But basically, you just sit and you take that ball right back behind here. And then what I like to do is I actually like to move it through a range of motion while I'm doing it. And then that kind of flosses the muscle. Really good, really tight though. So this is my mortal enemy. There's another picture, right? Just make sure you're placing it on the lateral side, right? So we're gonna SMR the hamstrings. We definitely want to get the TFL in there. Actually, no, let's go from bottom to top. Let's get the calves as well. So gastrocnemius, or say calves. Calves, hamstrings, and TFL, right? So we're focusing on these guys here, really everything that has to do with foot turnout. But look at how many of those muscles also were associated here. The one that we missed is the adductors. So let's throw that one in there as well. So there we go. We got four muscles to SMR. That's going to give us 4 muscles to primarily focus on when we do like our static stretches here as well. So we will do a static calf, wall calf stretch. Let's do a static standing biceps femoris stretch. So again, that's going to be that one with the leg up on the elevated surface, and then you're going to cross over your midline. Ooh, that is tight today. Then you're going to get your TFL, static standing TFL stretch, and then static standing adductor stretch. Okay, so you are now doing that one and that one with the foot turned out, leaning away. Okay, so those are our primary stretches. Then we got to get a little bit of cardio warm up in there. So let's do, here's the thing, we want to avoid the calves, right? So chances are I don't really want to do like the Stairmaster. So let's get something where we can kind of focus on like alignment without like really doing too much for any of our overactive muscles. Let's just do the elliptical machine, right? So elliptical machine. So one set of everything, 30 seconds each. Five minutes. Now remember, our warm-up should be a low intensity. We talked about heart rate training zones yesterday. Zone 1 is 65 to 75%. That's part of my workout. I don't want my client in zone 1 for their warm-up, so let's just do 50 to 60% of heart rate max, okay? So 50 to 60% heart rate max. Nothing too crazy, something to get their blood pumping, but it's not part of the workout. So each of these is a single-sided exercise, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes in terms of stretches at the top plus 5 minutes. So it's about a 15-minute warm-up, right? This is what a lot of corrective routines really do look like. They take a little bit of time to get through. This is why you want to encourage your client to learn how to do these movements so they can maybe get started on those before your session starts. Now, when we get to our core balance reactive stuff, we are going to put special emphasis on activating our underactive tissues. So let's go with 2 core exercises, 1 balance exercise and 1 reactive exercise that is going to target these underactive muscles. We're going to keep it relatively simple. Let's start with the core here. Now your core, when we're talking about core stabilization, we're typically talking about your transverse abdominis, your multifidus, your internal obliques, pelvic floor muscles, and diaphragm, right? Those are your stabilizer muscles for your spine. Were any of those muscles mentioned on our probable underactive muscles list? Not really, right? But we did see some glute stuff in there, right? And so what we can do is we can do like a floor bridge, right? Which can activate like my glutes. And then I can focus on, you know, tightening my core while I'm doing that. So just simply laying on the floor and doing like a bridge up like this. I'm focusing on core stability here. I can tighten my core, I can brace, and I can draw in while I'm also still getting a little bit of glute activation. So one of our best exercises here is just simply going to be a floor bridge. Now, can I also do maybe like a prone iso abs with one leg extended to get a little bit of hip extension in there? That's another way to turn on my glutes, right? Or maybe I could do even better if I want to get like my medial glute going. This is in my way again. I wish I had a gym. I'm so tired of trying to demo stuff in my room. All right, I can do a modified side plank with hip abduction, right? So I could go here. I can go into this position, bend one leg. You guys can see me. Now, I'm going here. I am not moving my spine, but I can move my hip. And there's a really good way to turn on that side butt. I just got to make sure I don't do any rotation with my thigh, activating internal or external rotators, right? So floor bridge, and then we'll do a modified side iso abs with hip abduction. Okay, that's the full frickin' NASM term, by the way. Modified side iso abs. It's a frickin' side plank with leg raise. So then we got to get a little bit of balance work in there. Now remember, this is a stabilization routine, so we got to focus on stabilization exercise. I shouldn't be moving this leg here. So what's something that can really activate, you know, we see our underactive muscles with the foot turnout, medial hamstring, gluteus maximus, medius. My popliteus and gracilis, those are both going to work to stabilize my knee while I'm balancing. So I'm effectively turning those on. Gluteus medius maximus, VMO, hamstring. What's a good balance exercise, you know, that's going to allow me to kind of work on my balance to stabilize this knee, but it's not going to like turn on any, like my overactive hip flexor complex? What do you guys think? Remember, the TFL is overactive and it's a hip flexor. So I probably don't want to do any balance exercises where I'm up here like this, right? So what else?
Single leg balance with reach.
Yeah, I'd say that's a good one. And then, so single leg balance with reach, right? That is this exercise here where you go to the front, to the side, and to the back, right? Sagittal plane, frontal plane, transverse plane. But let's go ahead and take, I'd say like, let's just focus only on like that frontal and transverse planes, right? Because that is going to allow us to leave the hip flexion portion alone. So we'll say single leg balance with reach. And then our coaching tips will say frontal and transverse planes only. And lastly, we need like a good exercise to turn those glutes on that'll also allow me to kind of do some reactive training. What do we think? What's a good reactive stabilization exercise?
I will go with jump squat to stabilization to get the VMO active with it.
Keep it simple. Jump squat. Yeah, jump squat to stabilization. Cool. I think that's pretty good. Normally we have a lot of newbies in here, so like I have to be like, I just do all the reps kind of quickly. But let's look at our reps here, right? We know it's a stabilization routine. So I need to do, for my core exercises, 12 to 20 repetitions. For my balance exercises, that's 12 to 20 on double-sided, but this is a single-sided exercise. So that's going to be 6 to 10 each. And then for my reactive exercise, that's going to be 5 to 8 reps. And all of them are 1 to 3 sets, except for core. Technically, that's 1 to 4 sets. So let's do 3 sets of everything. And let's do, for the floor bridge, let's take that all the way up to 15. Right? We'll get right in the middle there. With my side abs, let's do 8 each, right? Because we're doing 6 to 10. Oh, wait, no, sorry. Actually, let's do this. Let's do 20 and 10. That'll be nice and symmetrical. So 20 for the floor bridges, and then 10 on the left leg, 10 on the right for my side abs. Then let's do 10 each there, and then let's do 8. So 20, 10 each, and 8. Our tempo for the floor bridge is going to be slow. Our tempo for the isometric, for the abs is going to be slow. My tempo for the single leg balance is going to be slow. And my tempo for the squat jump to stabilization, we'll say 3 seconds, hold on landing. Okay, that'll be what we put there. Let's do it as a circuit. 0 seconds of rest. 60 seconds of rest at the, actually, you know what? This isn't so bad. Let's give them 30 seconds of rest. Make it a little rougher. And there we go. That's a pretty good core balance reactive section. Then I would build my workout, you know, depending on like what day it is. If it's chest day, I'm going to do chest exercises. If it's back day, I'm going to do back exercises. You know, I'm still going to be considering these overactive, underactive muscles. You know, I'm going to focus a lot on my glutes and things like that. But for the most part, we've done our job when it comes to turning off the overactive stuff and turning on the underactive stuff. Like this addressed it for the most part. That's what your movement prep is for. So now, like, let's say it's chest day, right? Now I can get into, you know, stability ball chest press, some push-ups, some cable chest press, like whatever. I can get into whatever the workout is for that day. If it's some total, if it's like the lower body, like leg stuff, sure, I could go like ball squat, step up to balance, single leg Romanian deadlift, and finish it all off with like, I don't know, band walks, right? We can have them go get a little bit of like lateral movement. And actually, let's have them do a transverse step up to balance, just so we can really get all planes of motion in there. And there we go. That's not a bad like leg day. I just addressed like, you know, the ball squat. That's going to give me an opportunity to really focus on like pushing my knees out and getting that VMO and glute activated. My transverse step up to balance, I can have my client work on like that external rotation and really get their balance in there. Single leg Romanian deadlift, really important one there. I would make sure to do, not only is that going to teach me how to do hinging motions, but by having that weight in the opposite hand, I can focus on my medial hamstring instead of my lateral one, right? My client's going to naturally want to do this kind of thing, which is all lateral hamstring. So by moving that dumbbell to the opposite hand, I'm really getting that inner hamstring muscle instead of the outer one. And then band walks are just a great way to kind of get that lateral movement and strengthen the side of the butt. And I hit all planes of motion, right? I got the sagittal plane in here. I got the transverse plane, sagittal plane, and frontal plane. So not a bad leg day, you know? If that were paired up with like some upper body exercises as well, you know, I could do that. My workout can be whatever I want it to be. I still consider my overactive, underactive muscles, but where the heavy lifting of like movement, the heavy lifting of like turn the overactive stuff off, turn the underactive stuff on, that should be done in your movement prep, which is also where like, you know, like let's say your client isn't really ready for reactive exercises, throw another balance exercise in there, you know? Let's say your client has like an overactive, you know, let's say they have shoulders elevating, right? And you're doing your balance stuff, right? There's no reason you can't have somebody stand on one leg and do like, you know, with like a cable, do like an I, Y, T pull, right? So that would be this, right? They would have a cable machine here. They would pull straight up overhead into an I. I should totally do the other side so I don't hit the wall. Good Lord. So they're going to do their I, and then they're going to go into a Y, and then they're going to go into a T pull. That's a great way to like, you know, this is a balance stabilization exercise. I'm not moving this leg, but I'm turning on my rotator cuff before I start doing maybe chest day. So you can step outside of like your NASM stuff. You know, it's not always about what's only in your textbook. You just need to understand those defining characteristics, right? What makes something stabilization? The balance leg doesn't move, you know? Then you can get really creative with it, right? Like I don't like doing a lot of arm work because I only have an hour to work with somebody, and arms are very small muscles that don't really burn very many calories. And so like I'm always telling my clients, I'm like, look, you want to hit a set for your arms, do it after our session's over. I'm totally cool with that. I think arm strength is important. It's just not as important as like adduction strength, you know? I'd rather work your biceps during a pull-up than in a bicep curl because you only pay me for an hour. You got more time? Go get those preacher curls in. I love them. They're great. But what if I had a client I was doing their balance stuff? I'm trying to get their foot turned on. I can get a little arm work out of the way. That's still a balance stabilization exercise. So that is a quick little like half of a routine. Then your cool down would basically be the same thing. I'm just going to go ahead and kind of move that down here. So you'll have it. And I'm just going to delete some of this section to make it like fit. There we go. Cool. So I will send this handout to you guys later. Do you guys understand? Like, does that make sense? Like when we built it, is that pretty good? Good tutorial. It's all kind of new doing this on the freaking internet. All right. Desktop. Foot. Turn out knees. Cave. Okay. So that's about all I got for you guys today. I'm going to slowly keep compiling this list. I'm not going to send this list out until we're done with the whole thing. But we'll say overhead squat solutions list. We'll get that on like the last time. But yeah, questions, comments, concerns? Or are you guys pretty good? How are we feeling?
Feeling good.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, there's another pretty lengthy one today, but again, a lot of that was introductory. Tomorrow, Tuesday, we'll move a little bit quicker. So thank you, guys. Check out Canvas later today. Your homework number 3 is going to be up there. So be ready for that, okay?
Okay,
Okay.
thank you. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you, Brett.
You guys.
Have a nice weekend, guys. All right, bye-bye.